Hiya, my name's Savannah Marshall and you're watching Sport and Icons.
So is Claressa Shields the greatest woman fighter of all time? Well, according to Claressa Shields, Muhammad Ali is the greatest fighter of all time and she is in second place. In fact, she would beat 98% of the men out there. Now, we'll talk about that bit in a second. Now, already when you look at Claressa Shields, her resume is outstanding. It really is. As an amateur, two-time Olympic gold medalist at a very, very young age. As a professional, 11 fights in, she's now a three-weight world champion, unified at 168, undisputed at 160, and undisputed because of a win last night at 154. So super welterweight and middleweight undisputed. And I believe that she's the first woman ever to become undisputed in two weight divisions. I might be wrong on that one, but either way, it's a hell of an achievement, that's for sure. Now, would you put her ahead of someone, say, like Laila Ali? Arguably. Would you put her ahead of Katie Taylor? Arguably. But again, when you look at it, with her against maybe a Jessica McCaskill or a Cecilia Braeckhouse or a Terry Harper and all these kind of ones, there are very, very strong points that would lead toward Claressa Shields being the best woman of this particular generation. All time, to be honest with you, I'm not really the right kind of person. I don't know that much about women's boxing. Ring IQ would have a far more better knowledge than what I would on this kind of subject. But I can only talk about what it is that I feel and what it is I know. Because when you look at it, she's 11 fights in and a three-weight world champion, undisputed at 2. 11 fights in. That will tell you in itself that the women's divisions are not that deep. The competition ain't that deep. You don't have to do too much to get a world title fight. And you see it a lot, which is champions are finding it difficult to get fights because there isn't enough competition. So they're having to bring women up or bring women down from other divisions just so they can have a fight. That will tell you in itself that the divisions are not that deep. Now, hopefully, because I believe it was actually pay-per-view last night, wasn't it, for Claressa Shields? So hopefully that pay-per-view done well. And hopefully she does grab women's boxing by the horn and drag it forward, along with Katie Taylor and Terry Harper and whoever else may be around. But I do feel that 11 fights in, you don't have to do too much to be considered the greatest woman of all time. Most women could do that. Most women around, if they are dedicated to it and they have even just a little bit of talent, it won't be too long before you're knocking on the door of a world title fight. It will only take half a dozen fights. So for me, that tells you in itself. Now, for her saying that she can beat 98% of the men, well, that would mean that 2% of the men that you can't beat are better than you, wouldn't it? So therefore, how can you be second of all time, right? Is what it is. But would she beat someone, say, at super welterweight, for example, like Jamel Charlo? No, not Nelly. Of course she wouldn't. She definitely wouldn't. In fact, she wouldn't beat most of the top guys in super welterweight. Wouldn't beat him even at welterweight. Wouldn't beat him at middleweight, certainly not. And at super middleweight, like Canelo and that, come on. But either way, I admire her confidence, and to be honest, her saying that she's the greatest woman fighter of all time, she's been saying it since pretty much before she turned professional. Okay, so she is taking a leaf out of Muhammad Ali's book. It's what Muhammad Ali used to do. I'm the greatest of all time. And if you say it enough, people will believe it. But when people look back on the career of Muhammad Ali, people will go, actually, yes, he was the greatest of all time. He proved it. So far, Claressa Shields, 11 fights in, it's very, very early. Very early. But when you're talking about a woman being the greatest woman fighter of all time at only 11 fights in, as I said before, it will tell you that the divisions are not that deep. In fact, her biggest rival at the minute, the only person that you could really look out there and say, maybe she could beat Claressa Shields, would be Savannah Marshall. I've met her a couple of times, interviewed her, of course, she's a lovely, lovely girl. But again, she's only had, half a dozen fights in? And already she's a middleweight world champion, WBO version, of course. But she is Claressa Shields' biggest rival. In fact, Savannah Marshall is the only woman to have beaten Claressa Shields in the amateurs. So that fight's pretty inevitable. You would imagine that fight will probably happen this year, as long as the pandemic behaves itself. We will probably end up seeing that fight this year. Okay, but to be called the greatest woman of all time, there's no issue with her proclaiming to be so. There's no issue with people saying that she is. Likewise, there's no issue with people saying that Katie Taylor is, again, of this current era. There's no issues with people saying Laila Ali is the greatest of all time. Okay, but, and it is a fact, as I said before, and we can't really escape from it. The competition just isn't there. It just isn't there. All you got to do is be a little bit of a standout, and you can achieve these things. And that's the truth of it. So best of luck to Claressa Shields. Hopefully, when we look back on her career, maybe even in a few years' time, we can go, yeah, definitely. Definitely. Because at the minute, when you look at super welterweight, middleweight, and super middleweight, her three divisions, the competition just isn't there, is it? Outside of Savannah Marshall, the competition isn't there. When you look down at where Katie Taylor's been at lightweight and super lightweight, there's more competition. But even then, she's had to bring certain fighters up and certain fighters down just so she can get certain fights at certain times. Don't be surprised. I mean, we can see someone like, say, Shannon Courtney, for example. I'm not really convinced by her, but she'll be a world champion at some point. You know she will be. Terry Harper already is world champion. And quite a few other ones. So that's my point. That's my point. It doesn't take too much to be considered the greatest woman fighter of all time or the greatest woman fighter in your division. It doesn't take too much. And that's the unfortunate thing about it. And as for her going on about how she should get equal pay with men, well, yeah, of course she should. Of course she should. Providing she sells enough tickets and pay-per-views that men do. If she sells 100,000 pay-per-view buys and Keith Thurman sells 100,000 pay-per-view buys and she sells 20,000 tickets and Keith Thurman sells 20,000 tickets, then yes, she should get exactly the same kind of money as Keith Thurman, shouldn't she? But if she doesn't, then no, of course not. You can only get paid what it is that you draw. And that goes for men as well, okay? But best of luck to her. I think she's doing an absolutely fantastic job. Very, very impressive. And if we are talking about her being potentially even the greatest woman fighter of all time, already at 11 fights in, that'll tell you that she's a hell of a talent. Drop your thoughts below. Click thumbs up, subscribe. Catch you all in the next video.